The first time I heard the knocking, I thought it was the pipes. Old houses talk when the seasons change. They pop, sigh, complain. The radiators in my place groan like old men getting out of easy chairs, and the floorboards remember every step anyone ever took across them. When you're pushing 60 and live alone, you get used to the little noises that prove the building hasn't given up yet. But pipes don't knock 3 times, pause, and then knock 3 times again. My name is Daniel Hayes. 27 years ago, I was a crime reporter for the Briarwood Herald, back when people still read the morning paper with their coffee instead of scrolling headlines on a glowing brick. If you lived anywhere in our county in the late 50s and early 60s, and something bad happened, chances are you saw my byline under it. The worst story I ever covered never got a proper ending. It started on a snow-dusted evening in December of 1960, when an 8-year-old girl named Molly Carter vanished from Maple Lane and seemed to take the town's innocence with her. For 2 winters, the case consumed us search parties, interrogations, rumors that spread faster than the flu. In 1964, the file was quietly shifted to the cold drawer. Life went on, the way it insists on doing. Molly's parents moved away. The search dogs died. The detective who led the investigation retired, drank, and died in that order. The town paved over some of the places we looked. People stopped saying her name out loud. I didn't. I just stopped saying it in print. The knocks started in November of last year. 3 soft raps on the wall by my bed, just past midnight. I woke up, heart hammering, sat there in the dark listening for a follow-up. Nothing. No scraping. No footsteps. Just the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the faint whistle of wind around the eaves. Old house, I muttered to myself. New draft. I went back to sleep and told no one, because who would I tell? Men my age are expected to complain about their knees, not the rhythm of their drywall. A week later, the knocks came again. Same time, same place. 3, pause, 3. This time I was awake for it. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table with a pot of overstewed coffee and a stack of yellowing notebooks, pretending I was finally going to organize my clippings before the mildew did it for me. The tape recorder sat in the center of the table, an old habit from the days when thoughts were faster than my pen. I hadn't turned it on. There was nothing to record except the small domestic sounds of a man who hadn't figured out how to retire from thinking about other people's tragedies. The knocks were soft but crisp, like someone tapping with the side of a knuckle. 3 in a row. A beat of silence. 3 more. They came from the wall that separated my bedroom from the tiny room I called an office, mostly to justify the stacks of paper in it. I sat very still. Hello? I said, because sometimes we say stupid things to empty rooms to make ourselves feel less foolish. Is that you, Mrs. Kopek? My neighbor on the other side was 90, if she was a day, hard of hearing but fond of late-night radio. Everything all right? No answer. No rustle of movement. I listened hard and could hear her television through the shared wall on the other side of the apartment, the familiar murmur of some game show audience, but nothing from the interior wall where the sound had come from. I got up, walked down the hall, and put my palm against the plaster. Cool, solid. I knocked back 3 times, matching the rhythm. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, so faint I might have convinced myself I imagined it, if I hadn't been ready this time, the answer came. 1, 2, 3. You hear a lot of strange things when you spend your life hanging around crime scenes and courtrooms. Confessions mumbled half into a shirt front. Mothers wailing under fluorescent lights. The little dry click a detective's pen makes when he decides a lead is dead. None of that rattled me the way 6 polite taps on a Tuesday night did. I slept with the radio on after that. Old habit from the days when silence sounded too much like guilt. The 3rd time the knocking came, I turned on the tape recorder. It was early December, the same week the town workers strung lights across. Main Street, and the same week the Briarwood Herald ran its annual holiday shopping guide that tried, bravely, to pretend the world beyond our county line wasn't on fire in little ways. Snow had dusted the roofs that morning and melted by noon. The air smelled like wet leaves and someone else's chimney smoke. I'd just finished washing the dinner dishes, one plate, one fork, one glass, a bachelor's inventory, and was drying my hands when that old itch crawled up the back of my neck. It felt like being watched, but not in the human way. More like when you step outside at dusk and realize the sky is taking attendance. I went to the bedroom, placed the recorder on the knitstand, pressed the red button, and sat on the edge of the bed waiting to feel like an idiot. Instead, I felt prepared. The knocks came 5 minutes later. 3. Pause. 3. On the tape, you can hear my breath catch. You can hear the faint rustle of my sleeve as I reach out and touch the wall. I knock back, knuckles sounding dull against the plaster. Then there's that small, unbearable stretch of silence where every rational part of my brain is shouting that this is stupid, that its pipes are settling, or some echo of a neighbor's clumsy shoe. Then the wall answers. 3 knocks. So soft the tape almost doesn't catch them, but distinct, deliberate. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I played the recording back again and again, headphones tight over my ears, the hiss and pop of aging tape as familiar to me as the creak of my chair. On the 5th listen, I heard something under the knocks, an odd little stutter of static, almost like distant radio interference. Not loud enough to be meaningful, but there. That detail would have meant nothing, if not for what arrived in my mailbox the next morning. It was wedged between the usual assortment of bills and junk flyers, a plain white envelope addressed by hand. No return address, no postmark. I recognized just D. Hayes and my street, written in a careful, old-fashioned script. The kind of handwriting they don't teach anymore. Inside was a single photograph and a note. The photo was black and white, glossy, 8 by 10. At first glance, it could have been pulled from any family album in town. A little girl standing in a snowy front yard, bundled in a coat that looked too big for her, hat crooked over braids. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes wide and serious. Behind her, a row of modest houses marched down a street I knew far too well. Maple Lane. I didn't need to read the faint blue ink on the bottom border to know her name, but I read it anyway. Molly Carter, age 8, December 1960. The note was shorter. 4 words, written on lined paper torn from a small notebook. Are you listening now? No signature, no explanation. I sat at my kitchen table, the same place I'd listened to the knocks, the photo laid carefully on the worn wood. Outside, the mail truck moved on, its rattle receding down the street. Inside, my heart thudded slow and heavy against my ribs. I hadn't written about Molly Carter in 15 years. Not by name, not in print. By the time the calendar rolled into the 70s, the Herald had decided people were tired of being reminded of the things they couldn't fix. Missing children made for uncomfortable breakfast reading. But apparently, someone remembered that once upon a time, a much younger version of me had cared enough to keep digging long after the official search gave up. Cared enough to fill notebooks with details no one else thought important. Cared enough to drive out to Maple Lane on the anniversary every year and sit in his car for an hour, engine off, hands on the wheel, staring at the patch of winter road where a bicycle had once lain on its side, one wheel still spinning. Are you listening now? The question burrowed under my skin. I picked up the phone and, for the first time in a decade, dialed a number I'd sworn I was done calling. Helen? Her voice on the other end was older, thinner around the edges, but unmistakable. Dan? My God? Is everything all right? That was a loaded question to drop on a man holding a ghost in his hand, but I knew what she meant. Old friends don't call late in the morning without reason. Old reporters don't call mothers of missing children at all, if they're wise. I don't know, I said honestly. But I think something's moving about Molly. The silence on the line tightened. When Helen spoke again, her voice had the brittle steadiness of someone who'd rebuilt herself too many times to shatter easily anymore. It's been 27 years, she said. The only thing moving is the calendar. I got a photograph in the mail, I said. Of her, Maple Lane, winter, and a note that says, "Are you listening now?" I heard her draw in a breath that sounded like it hurt. Someone's idea of a sick joke, she said. They send those to parents too. You know, letters. Photos that might be her. People see her face in every child who looks a little like her. Then they move on. We don't. This wasn't addressed to you, I said gently. It was addressed to me. Then maybe they think you can finally admit what everyone else already has. She snapped, then softened. I'm sorry. That wasn't fair. I haven't slept well this week. The date is coming, December 9th, the night she disappeared. I'm not calling to stir up old wounds for the fun of it, I said. There's more. I've been hearing. Knocks. Pipes, she said automatically, the way you say wind when a door slams in the middle of the night. I recorded them, I said. Last night, 3, then 3 more. And underneath this is going to sound insane. There's a little burst of static, like radio interference. Or, I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. Or like the edge of an old tape. The line was quiet for a long beat. Dan, she said finally, where exactly on the wall are you hearing it? Bedroom, I said, north wall. The one that backs onto the little office. She exhaled, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. You remember which wall Molly's room shared back on Maple Lane? I did. I'd stood in that doorway enough times during the investigation, notepad in hand, feeling like an intruder in a space that still smelled like talc and crayons. The hallway wall, I said. 3 knocks, she murmured. Always 3. When she was little and wanted to be let into our room at night, she'd knock 3 times. If we didn't answer, she'd wait and do it again. We used to joke she'd make a good detective. Never gave up on a pattern. Something cold and electric crawled along my spine. I don't know what any of it means yet, I said. But someone out there wants us to start listening again. To her, or to them, or to something that hasn't finished talking. I think we should. Look, together. Helen was quiet, so long I thought the line had gone dead. I'm tired, Dan, she said at last, and there was no anger in it this time. Just bone-deep exhaustion. Every time we look, I aged 10 years. The police looked. The volunteers looked. You looked. And still she didn't come home. I know, I said softly. But this isn't a sheriff at my door, or a new theory from someone who watched too many detective shows. This is someone who knows where I live, what I did, and how to push the one button I haven't turned off yet. They sent me her picture. They're knocking on my walls. If it's a cruel joke, we expose it and shut it down. If it's not? If it's not, she echoed. If it's not, I said, then maybe the story we told ourselves about that night was never big enough to hold what actually happened. And maybe she's been trying to correct us for years. There was a small, shaky laugh on the other end. You always did know how to sell a headline, she said. I suppose there are worse things than going crazy in company. I felt something in my chest unclench. Come by this afternoon, I said. I'll play you the tape. We'll look at the photo together. No promises. Just listening. All right, she said. But if this is someone tormenting an old woman through you, I expect you to use those reporter teeth of yours on them. I've got a few left, I said. See you at 3. When I hung up, the house seemed to lean in around me, walls and windows paying attention. I walked back to the bedroom and put my hand flat against the north wall. If this is you, I said under my breath, feeling ridiculous and completely sincere at the same time. You picked a hell of a time to start talking, kiddo. Somewhere deep in the plaster, too quiet for anything but imagination. I thought I felt it a tiny vibration, like the after echo of a far-off knock. And for the first time in 27 years, the cold case file in my head shifted from closed for lack of answers to open for escalation. Whatever the mystery of the missing child, the tapes, and the knocks turned out to be, one thing was finally, undeniably true. I was listening. I never planned to become the man who listens to walls. When I left the paper, I thought the rest of my life would be measured in grocery lists, doctor appointments, and the slow shrinking of my world down to the armchair by the window. Instead, my twilight years turned into a correspondence course with forces no one has a name for, all because an 8-year-old girl vanished from a quiet street and refused to let her story freeze in a police file. Molly Carter disappeared in the fall of 1964, and if you had asked anyone in town back then, they would have told you the same 3 facts. She was last seen in her front yard. Her bicycle was found at the end of the cul-de-sac, and no one ever saw her again. What they wouldn't have told you, because they didn't know, or didn't want to know, is that on the night she vanished, the sky over Maple Lane was louder than it had any right to be, and that some of that noise sank into our houses, our radios, and our bones. Back then I was 31, a youngish crime reporter with more ambition than sense, working for the Briarwood Herald. Our town in 1964 looked like something you'd see on a postcard white picket fences. Kids playing stickball in the street, the smell of fresh-cut grass, and cigarette smoke in equal measure. People locked their doors out of habit, not out of fear. We had crime, sure, but it was the mundane kind. Bar fights, the occasional burglary, a drunk who took a swing at the wrong mailbox. The word mystery belonged in dime store paperbacks, not in our police blotter. That illusion lasted right up until the day Molly didn't come home. The story I'm about to tell you isn't the one that ran in the paper. That version had all the right beats timeline, quotes, a neat ending that said, "Case remains unsolved," and let readers fold the page and move on to the sports section. This version is the one I didn't know how to write back then, the one that includes the knocks no one could explain, the tapes no one should have been able to make, and the way the air itself seemed to lean in close when an 8-year-old girl stepped out into her yard to look up at the night. It started for me with a phone call from the city desk. "Dan, get over to Maple Lane," my editor barked, voice already riding that edge between excitement and dread that only bad news gives a newsroom. "Little girl missing, name of Carter. Cops are setting up a search. Take the photographer and don't screw it up." Missing kids were rare enough that we didn't have a template ready. Adults go missing all the time, and half of them don't want to be found. Children, that's a different category of terror altogether. By the time I got there, the street was already transforming from ordinary neighborhood to makeshift command post. Patrol cars idled with their lights turning the snow blue and red, neighbors clustered in small, stunned groups, and the Carter house glowed too bright, its porch light a frantic beacon. It was one of those brittle winter evenings where your breath hangs in front of you like a question mark, and every sound feels a little too sharp. I remember stepping out of my car and feeling, even before I knew the details, that something in the air was off, like a radio slightly between stations. Molly's parents, Helen and Charlie, were on the porch surrounded by uniforms. Helen clutched a folded cardigan to her chest like a life vest, her knuckles bone white. Charlie paced the narrow strip of snow-dusted lawn, jaw clenched, eyes scanning the street as if she might simply walk back into view. Late for dinner, story already forming on her lips. When I approached with my notebook, I didn't introduce myself right away. There's a moment at scenes like that where a reporter's job and a human being's decency collide. I stood at the edge of the yard and listened instead. She was right there. Helen kept saying, voice climbing and dropping in that nauseating roller coaster pattern of someone replaying the same 3 minutes in their head. Right there, by the maple tree. I went in to take the pie out of the oven. It was 5 minutes, maybe less. When I came back, the yard was empty. Her bike, she gestured weakly toward the end of the street, where an officer was photographing a small discarded shape on the asphalt. I knew, even before I saw it, what it would be. These stories settle into awful patterns. The official version never mentioned the sound. Why would it? You can't put "the air hummed wrong" into an incident report. But I remember it clearly. As the first wave of volunteers gathered, as the sheriff started barking instructions about grid searches and flashlights and checking sheds, there was a low, intermittent crackle overhead, like distant static. It might have been a plane. It might have been nothing. It threaded through the evening unnoticed by everyone except, I suspect, one 8-year-old girl who had always paid more attention to the sky than the rest of us. I didn't talk to Molly that day, of course. By the time I arrived, she was already gone. I met her retrospectively, through descriptions, school photos, as scattered artifacts that make up a child's public record. Freckles, brown hair in 2 braids, a serious expression in her class picture, as if the photographer had caught her mid-calculation. She was always tuned in, Helen told me later, when the shock had hardened into a more durable kind of sorrow. She'd ask questions other kids didn't. Not "why is the sky blue?" but "what's behind it?" Like she was convinced there was another layer no one was talking about. The search that first night followed the usual script. Flashlights bobbing through backyards. Men in heavy coats calling her name into the cold. Dogs weaving through underbrush, noses to the ground. Reporters staying just far enough back not to get yelled at, eyes hungry for details we could spin into sentences. I remember the sheriff's voice on the radio, calm but tight as he coordinated units. I remember neighbors offering coffee to officers, their hands shaking just enough to make the styrofoam cups tremble. I remember Charlie at the end of the cul-de-sac, staring at the small, abandoned bicycle, like if he could just will the last few minutes to rewind, the frame would fill up again with his daughter's weight. What I didn't notice until much later, until the tapes, the knocks, and everything that followed, was how often people mentioned little sounds they couldn't place that night. A hum in the wiring, a pop in the radio, the way the television flickered just as Helen realized something was wrong. At the time, those details slid right past me. We were looking for footprints, tire tracks, witnesses. We weren't listening for a pattern in the background noise. You've already heard how the case was worked in broad strokes. The door-to-door canvass, the suspects briefly eyed and set aside, the out-of-town relatives questioned and cleared. No ransom note, no sign of struggle, no body. The worst kind of story, one that ends with a question and a photograph on a bulletin board. After the first frantic 48 hours, the town settled into that long, wheezy waiting room feeling. We were still looking, but with each passing day, it felt more like we were looking backward instead of outward. And then, about a week after Molly disappeared, the first knock came. It was a Tuesday late, the kind of hour when decent people are in bed, and the indecent are working quietly enough not to draw attention. I was at my typewriter, the house lit only by a desk lamp and the faint blue glow of the TV in the next room. I'd been trying to write a follow-up piece, Community Still Searching for Missing Girl, but every sentence felt like a lie. The phone hadn't rung in hours. Outside, the town had gone to ground. The sound, when it came, wasn't loud. 3 soft taps on the wall behind my bookcase. Not the pipes, those clanked and hissed with a personality I knew well. Not the house settling that had its own vocabulary of creaks. This was polite, deliberate. 1, 2, 3. I froze, fingers hovering over the keys. There's a moment, right after something strange happens, where your mind scrambles for the most ordinary explanation it can find, no matter how ill-fitting. A branch, a neighbor, the cat I didn't own. Anything but the idea that someone or something was on the other side of that wall asking, in its own way, to be let in. Old house, I muttered, because saying it out loud made it easier to believe. I got up anyway and put my ear to the faded wallpaper. The wall was cool, unremarkable. I knocked back, half as a joke, half as an experiment. 1, 2, 3. For a long 5 seconds, there was nothing. Then, so faint, I thought at first it was my own pulse, the answer came. 1, 2, 3. I stepped back fast enough to knock my knee on the coffee table. The rational part of my brain sprinted through options. It's sound bouncing back somehow. It's a neighbor banging something in his living room at the exact same rhythm by coincidence. It's something, anything but an intelligent response. Because if you accept intelligent response, then you have to start asking who and from where, and why walls suddenly needed to be part of your social circle. I didn't sleep much that night. The knocks didn't repeat, but the absence of them was almost worse. In the morning, the whole thing felt like a bad dream, the kind you shake off with a strong cup of coffee and a fresh to-do list. I almost managed it. Then I went into the newsroom and heard 2 deputies talking by the water cooler. Carter House had another one last night, one said, voice pitched low. Another what? Knock. Helen says she heard 3 taps on Molly's bedroom wall. Swears it's the same pattern as before. Sheriff told her it's the furnace. Trouble is, they don't have a furnace in that wall. The words hit me like cold water. 3 taps. Bedroom wall. I stood there with my paper cup halfway to my mouth, suddenly very awake. From that point on, I started listening differently. Not just at home, not just to my own unnerving little percussion section, but everywhere the case brushed up against people's lives. The pastor mentioned strange echoes in the church hall when they held a prayer vigil. A radio enthusiast in town complained that his set picked up a weird rhythmic static burst whenever the sheriff's office broadcast certain calls. Helen, hollow-eyed and exhausted, told me in a rare unguarded moment that sometimes, late at night, she could hear Molly humming on the other side of the bedroom door. Not singing, not crying, just humming the same bar of a tune over and over, like a record caught in a groove. If this were a tidy detective story, this would be the point where the hard-nosed investigator dismisses the supernatural and doubles down on tire impressions and alibis. I tried, God knows I tried. I knocked on doors, chased down rumors, went over the sheriff's notes whenever he forgot to lock his filing cabinet. But every time I thought I had my feet firmly on the ground, something in the air, in the wires, in the walls, would remind me that this case didn't care much for neat categories. The tapes came later. They're the reason I can't write this off as grief, hallucinations, and bad plumbing. Because knocks can be dismissed. Feelings can be medicated. But a voice on tape, especially a voice you recognize, recorded in a place it shouldn't have been able to reach, that's harder to argue with. That's where the story of Molly Carter stops being just a missing child case and becomes something that reaches past the margins of what we like to call reality. And it all started, oddly enough, with a yard sale. I must have replayed that cassette 20 times in a row. Every single time, the same 3 sounds. A soft rustle, as if someone brushed a sleeve against the microphone. Then 2 distinct knocks. Thud, thud, and after them that barely audible breath in the speaker, the one I could no longer mistake for anything else. To anyone else, it would just be noise. To me, it was my daughter's voice buried in the static, hiding somewhere in frequencies the cassette recorder had no business catching. I sat in the living room in half-darkness, the only light a yellow puddle from the desk lamp spreading across the table while the rest of the room dissolved into shadow. The tape recorder lay in front of me, old, with worn-down buttons and a faint smell of dust and warm plastic, looking like it had already lived 2 lifetimes before this one. I pressed play again, even though I knew every second of that recording by heart. Rustle, pause, thud, thud. When Molly was little, she used to knock like that whenever she hid in the closet and wanted me to find her. 2 slow knocks with a short break between them. She'd invented that secret code when she was 5. Back then, it was a cute game. Now, it felt like a cruel joke the universe was playing on me. I stopped the tape, rewound just a hair, and played it again, this time with headphones clamped tight over my ears. I turned the volume all the way up until the dirty analog hiss filled my skull like a storm, washing out every other sound in the house. Right after the second knock, if you really listened, there was something else buried under the noise, like someone shifting their weight. A soft step, a faint scrape that didn't belong to the tape, but to a presence just off mic. I closed my eyes and leaned forward, elbows on the table, the plastic of the headphones creaking around my ears, holding my breath as if that would somehow help me hear better. For a moment, there was only noise, the kind of endless, colorless sound you get when a machine records silence. Then, beneath it, as thin as a spider's thread, came a word. Dad. The word wasn't clean. It wasn't even really there, more like the ghost of a sound, half suggestion, half memory, as if the tape itself was doubting whether it should let it through. If I had never heard my daughter call me like that 1,000 times before, I might have dismissed it as my mind filling in the blanks. But I had. And now I couldn't unhear it. I tore the headphones off and let them drop on the table. They hit the wood with a dull slap and spun slowly, a cable twisting like a black snake, while my heart pounded way too hard for a man who was just sitting in his own house. From the hallway, the grandfather clock chose that exact moment to chime once, announcing the half hour, and the single note jumped straight into my nerves like a jab. I stood up and paced the room, feeling the worn path in the carpet under my feet, every step reminding me how many nights I'd already spent like this. The house was too quiet. No cartoons blaring from the TV. No small feet pattering down the stairs. No Molly yelling from her room that she couldn't find her favorite blue sweater. Just the distant hum of the fridge, the soft ticking of the clock, and that damned cassette spinning in my head, even when it wasn't playing. In that silence, the whole thing narrowed down to 3 possibilities. 1. It was all a coincidence, some random pattern of noise that my brain was stitching into a familiar shape because it was desperate for anything that sounded like hope. 2. Somebody had tampered with the cassette, someone who knew about Molly, knew how she knocked, knew how she used to say, "Dad," someone who wanted to mess with me on a level so personal it made my skin crawl. 3. I didn't want to think about the third one. The idea that my daughter might somehow still be out there, that she'd found some impossible way to talk to me through these tapes, belonged in cheap late-night TV shows, not in my kitchen at 2 in the morning. And yet there I was, wide awake, arguing with myself about the physics of analog recordings and the rules of the dead. The phone on the counter vibrated, cutting through my thoughts. The screen lit up with a single word. Harris. Detective Harris never called me this late unless he had something, or unless something had gotten worse. I grabbed the phone, my thumb already slick on the screen. "Yeah?" I answered. "Did I wake you?" He asked, his voice sounding tired, more tired than usual, like the day hadn't ended for him in a long time. "No," I said. I wasn't sleeping. There was a small pause, just long enough for me to hear faint traffic on his end, like he was outside, in his car, maybe parked somewhere he shouldn't be at this hour. "You still up with those tapes?" he asked. My eyes slid back to the cassette player on the table, the little plastic window showing the brown ribbon spooled neatly inside. "You could say that," I muttered. "You got something?" "Maybe," he replied. You home?" I let out a humorless breath. Where else would I be? "I'll be there in 15, he said. "Don't touch the front door until I get there." The line went dead before I could ask anything else. I stared at the phone for a second, then at the door, then at the dark hallway that led to Molly's empty bedroom. Don't touch the front door. I crossed the room, switched off the tape recorder, and pulled the cassette out. The little piece of plastic suddenly felt heavier than it should, like I was holding a fragment of a larger, unseen weight. On impulse, I slipped it into my pocket. Whatever Harris was bringing, whatever news was about to cross the threshold of my house, I wanted this tape on me when it happened. The 15 minutes before he arrived stretched themselves into an hour in my head, even though the clock insisted otherwise. I stood by the front window, slightly to the side, so I could see the driveway without being seen from the street. Old habits from a time before I was just a father of a missing girl sliding back into place. Finally, headlights turned into the driveway, sweeping over the lawn and catching on Molly's forgotten pink scooter lying on its side near the porch. I'd never found the strength to throw it away. It had become a kind of accidental memorial I walked past every day. A plain sedan rolled to a stop, the engine cut off, and for a moment, everything was still again. Harris climbed out, his shoulders hunched against a wind that wasn't really there, his coat hanging open like he'd left the station in a hurry. He paused at the base of the porch steps, looking up at the front door like it was already a crime scene, and that small, instinctive caution of his set my teeth on edge. I opened the door before he could knock. He flinched slightly at the sudden movement, then forced a tired half-smile. "Evening," he said. "Nothing about this is evening," I replied. "What's going on?" He glanced past me into the house, then over his shoulder at the quiet street as if checking for shadows. "Mind if we talk inside?" he asked. "That depends," I said. "You told me not to touch the front door. You want to explain that?" His jaw flexed once. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even though there was no one around to hear. "Your neighbor across the street called something in an hour ago," he said. "Said she saw someone on your porch." The words hit harder than I expected. "On my porch?" I echoed. "Who?" "She couldn't get a good look," Harris replied. "Said it was dark. The porch light was off. Just saw a figure standing at your door. Not moving, just standing there." My skin prickled. "I was in the living room," I said. "I didn't hear anyone knock." "She said they didn't knock," Harris said quietly. "Said they just stood there for a long time and then left." A cold, irrational thought slid into my mind like a blade. 2 knocks, but not on the door. On tape. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. He walked past me, his eyes scanning the entryway, the floor, the doorframe, like he was already cataloging details. He was looking for something, and it wasn't the right words. "Did you check the porch?" I asked. "I did a quick look before you opened the door," he said. "Didn't want you stepping on anything before I got here, just in case." "In case of what?" "In case they left you something," he answered. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. We both turned our heads at the same time toward the door, like it might answer for itself. "Stay here," he said, and stepped back outside. I followed anyway, stopping just behind him as he ran a small flashlight beam along the boards of the porch. The wood creaked under his weight, and mine answered a heartbeat later with a quieter, more familiar complaint. "Here," he murmured. Near the doormat, half tucked under the front edge, lay a small rectangular object wrapped in what looked like a torn piece of an old T-shirt. Harris pulled on a glove, crouched down, and carefully lifted the cloth. Underneath was a cassette. Not one of mine. This one was dark red, the plastic cheap and semi-transparent. The label peeled halfway off, leaving only torn white scraps clinging to the surface. My mouth went dry. "Another tape," I said. Harris slipped it into an evidence bag, sealing the top with a practiced motion. "Yeah," he said. Another tape. He straightened up and looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the same thing that had been tightening around my lungs since the first one turned up. A mix of dread and expectation. "Inside?" he said. Now, back at the kitchen table, my old tape recorder sat where I'd left it, the space beside it empty and waiting like it knew what was coming. Harris placed the bagged red cassette on the table like it was a live animal that might bite if we got too close. "You sure you're up for this?" he asked. I almost laughed. "Up for what?" I said, listening to whatever sick joke this is. Hearing my daughter's voice where it doesn't belong? "Yeah, Harris, I'm up for it. I don't have the luxury not to be." He winced slightly at that, then nodded. "Fair enough." He opened the bag with a careful tear, slid the cassette out, and turned it in his gloved hands, checking for anything obvious. Markings, etchings, anything scratched into the plastic that might hint at who had handled it before us. "Nothing," he muttered. "No initials, no numbers. Just play it," I said. He handed it to me, and for a second I hesitated, the weight of it sitting cold in my palm, before I pushed my old tape out of the recorder and replaced it with the red one. The mechanism clicked, swallowed it, and settled with that soft mechanical sigh I'd heard all night. Harris took a seat opposite me. I did not offer him headphones this time. Whatever was on this tape, we were both going to hear it in the open air of my kitchen. I pressed play. At first, there was only silence, not even hiss, just the faint mechanical whir of the spinning reels, a ghost of sound behind the plastic. Then, very slowly, the static began to rise, like someone was turning up the volume on a storm far away, a low curtain of noise drawing itself across the room. A low hum bled in under it, not quite electrical and not quite human, something in between that made the hair on my arms lift. Harris's eyes flicked up to meet mine, a quick, sharp look, then dropped back to the recorder. The hum wavered, dipped, and for a split second I could swear there were words inside it, too fast and too warped to catch, but structured in a way random noise never is. Then came the knocks. Thud, thud, exactly the same rhythm as on the first tape. Exactly the same weight, the same distance between them, as if whoever recorded this had studied the sound until they could reproduce it perfectly. "Jesus," Harris whispered, the word escaping before he could stop it. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the walls too close, the ceiling too low. On the recording, after the second knock, there was a soft scrape, like a shoe on concrete, a foot shifting, a hand brushing a wall, something that sounded uncomfortably alive. Then a voice, not Molly's, not mine, a low male whisper right up against the microphone, words bitten off and distorted by the tape, but still clear enough to understand. "Can you hear her now?" The room went dead quiet. Even the fridge seemed to hold its breath. On the tape, the static roared back for a heartbeat, and then cut off so abruptly it was like someone had taken a knife to the sound. The reels kept turning, but there was nothing else. Just blank tape sliding past the playback head with meaningless efficiency. I hit stop with more force than necessary, my finger jamming the button down. Harris sat back, his face a shade paler, his fingers tapping in a rhythmic pattern on the tabletop that betrayed more than his voice ever would. "Okay," he said finally, his voice thinner than usual. "Okay, so it's not just you. What is that supposed to mean?" I snapped, sharper than I intended. "It means," he said carefully, "that I heard it too. The same pattern, the same knocks. And that voice." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "Can you hear her now?" I repeated slowly. "Who the hell is that?" "That's what we're going to find out," Harris said. His gaze drifted to my pocket, where the first cassette still rested against my leg like a hot coal. "How many tapes did you say you had before tonight?" he asked. "One," I replied. "Found it in the box in the attic. Same knocks. Same. Feeling. And now someone leaves another one right at your door. He glanced toward the dark hallway that led to the front of the house, then back at me. We're not dealing with coincidences anymore, he said. I almost told him about the whisper I thought I heard on the first tape, the fragile dad that might have been nothing more than my brain clawing at hope, but the words stuck in my teeth. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the first cassette, and set it on the table next to the red one. They looked wrong together, like two puzzle pieces from different boxes that somehow still fit when you forced them. You're taking them? I asked. For now, Harris said. We'll have them analyzed properly. Audio forensics, enhancement, the whole 9 yards. If there's anything hidden in those frequencies, anything we're not picking up with our ears, we'll drag it out. My gut rebelled at the thought of the tapes leaving the house, leaving my reach. Make copies, I said. Leave one set with me. He studied my face for a long second. You think that's a good idea? He asked. No, I admitted. But I need them. He nodded slowly, like he understood more than he was willing to admit. I'll see what I can do. He gathered the cassettes, slipping them back into separate bags with deliberate care. As he did, something on the red cassette caught my eye. A tiny indentation near the top edge, like someone had pressed a pen tip into the plastic. Not quite hard enough to scratch letters, just enough to leave a small circular pit. There, I said, pointing. Is that anything? Harris leaned closer, squinting. Could be nothing, he murmured. Could be a mark. We'll check it under better light. He sealed the bags again and stood up, his chair scraping lightly against the tile. I'm putting a patrol car on your street tonight, he said. Unmarked, but close enough to see the house. If whoever left that tape decides to come back, I want eyes on them. And if they don't come back? I asked. He paused at the kitchen doorway. Then we follow the tape, he said. Wherever it leads. After he left, the house felt even emptier than before. The spot on the table where the tape recorder had been looked naked, like a missing tooth in a familiar smile. I sat back down, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes until patterns of light swam in the darkness behind them, trying to push back the echo of that voice. Can you hear her now? The words replayed in my mind, the way only a voice on tape can, flat, detached from any body, any context, existing only as sound without a face. Whoever had whispered them knew exactly what they were doing. They knew about the knocks. They knew about the tapes. They knew about Molly, and they were talking to me. For the first time since my daughter vanished, the terror that lived in my chest had a new companion pressing in right beside it. Anger. If someone was playing with me, using my child's memory as bait, then the next knock, wherever it came from, wasn't going to be at my door. It was going to be at theirs. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep implied drifting, soft edges, the luxury of not gripping the edge of the world with both hands. Instead, I just sat there at the kitchen table long after Harris left, staring at the spot where the tape recorder had been, replaying every second of those recordings in my head as if I could will new details into existence. At some point, the sky outside the window shifted from black to the bruised blue of early morning, and the house changed with it, the shadows retreating a little, the silence growing thinner, less absolute, like the world was slowly remembering itself. None of that made it easier to breathe. The tapes were gone, riding around town in the back of Harris's sedan in clear plastic bags, on their way to people with software and equipment and sterile offices who were going to decide whether I was losing my mind or being hunted. Without them, the house felt wrong, emptier in a way I couldn't name. The horror of hearing my daughter's presence in those sounds had been replaced, absurdly, by the horror of not having them here at all. I poured myself coffee I didn't want, took a sip that tasted like ash, and found my eyes drifting again and again toward the front door, as if the red cassette might magically reappear on the mat, wrapped in another scrap of somebody's shirt. By 7:30, the neighborhood was awake. Cars rolled past outside as people left for work. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked for too long, the way dogs do when they sense something off, long before their owners do. Across the street, Mrs. Green, my neighbor, and apparently my unofficial lookout, pulled her curtains aside just enough to peek at my house. Our eyes met through the glass, and she flinched, pretending she hadn't been watching. I didn't blame her. If I were her, I'd be watching this house too. My phone buzzed on the counter, skittering slightly across the surface. For a half-second, my heart jumped to the conclusion that Harris had already found something, that the experts had listened to the tapes and called him back in a panic, saying there was no earthly explanation for what they'd heard. Instead, the screen showed a different name, A.Y., my sister. I let it ring once, twice, and forced myself to pick up. "Hey," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I wanted. "You sound terrible," she said without preamble. "Have you slept at all?" "I've had worse nights," I lied. Amy exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that always meant she was choosing which argument not to start. "Harris called me," she said. "He thought you might not. He said there was." Another tape. "Of course he did," I muttered. "Can't keep a thing like that to himself." "Don't be like that," she snapped, then softened. "He's worried about you. I'm worried about you. Are you okay?" I stared at the coffee cooling in front of me, at the faint ring it had left on the table. Somewhere upstairs, the house creaked as it adjusted to the morning temperature, like it was an old animal shaking itself awake. "No," I said finally. "But I'm still here." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "He told me someone left it on your porch in the middle of the night, that your neighbor saw someone just standing out there. Are you sure you're safe in that house?" "Safe?" I repeated, almost laughing. "Amy, if the person who took Molly wanted to come back for me, they wouldn't have to leave me mixtapes first." "That's not funny," she said sharply. It wasn't a joke. She let that hang between us, and in that silence I could hear faint kitchen noise on her end, the clink of a mug, the hum of her fridge, life going on in a home where my daughter wasn't missing. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to wait for Harris to call," I said. "I'm going to listen to whatever his sound people find. And then—" I trailed off, because the truth was, I didn't know what came after that. I only knew that standing still felt worse than walking blindfolded toward a cliff. "And then you're going to let the police handle it," Amy finished for me, as if reading my mind. "You're not going after whoever's doing this on your own. Promise me." I didn't answer right away. Through the front window, I could see the shape of an unmarked car sitting casually at the corner, exactly where Harris said he'd put it, the morning light turning its windshield into a blank mirror. Someone sat inside, probably half bored, half on edge, watching my house like it was a theater stage where nothing had started yet. "I'll let you know what they find," I said instead. "Daniel," her voice sharpened. "Promise me." I closed my eyes. Amy had been the one who kept me upright the first week after Molly disappeared, when the house was full of uniforms and questions and plastic cups of coffee, when I couldn't tell what day it was without looking at the headlines. She'd been the one to hold me up at the press conference when the words "ongoing," "investigation," and "no sign of foul play" started to sound like code for "we have nothing." I owed her more than half-truths. But there are some promises you shouldn't make when you know you won't keep them. "I'll be careful," I said quietly. "That's not—" she started, then stopped herself. "Fine, be careful. But answer your phone. And if anything else shows up at that house, you call Harris before you do anything. You understand?" "Yeah," I said. "I understand." We hung up, and the kitchen dropped back into its new default silence. I had the urge to go upstairs, to open Molly's room and sit on her bed, to remind myself that she had been real, that she had owned things and left messes, and complained about homework. Instead, I found myself walking toward the small room I'd started using as an office since all this began, the place where the case files lived. The binders were stacked on the shelves like a poor man's shrine. Copies of police reports, printouts of emails, screenshots of messages from strangers who claimed to have seen a girl who might be her in some gas station, some mall, some nowhere town 3 states away. On the desk sat a folder Harris had given me months back when he still believed keeping me informed would somehow keep me calm. I pulled it open and flipped through until I found what I was looking for. The timeline. It started like they all did. Last confirmed sighting, time, location. The day Molly disappeared had been unremarkable in every way until it wasn't. She had gone to a friend's house 2 blocks over, walked the same route she'd taken 100 times. The friend's mother had watched her leave. 2 neighbors had seen her on the sidewalk. She never made it home. There was a gap in that map, a small blank space in a familiar street, and in that blank space, someone had taken my daughter. Back then, there had been no tapes, no knocks, no disembodied voices whispering messages tailored to my nightmares. Back then, it had been almost comforting to believe in a simple monster, a man in a car, a stranger at a corner, a single act of violence or madness that could be hunted down with enough effort. This thing with the tapes felt different. It was patient. It was deliberate. It was personal. The clock on the wall clicked over to 8:15. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Harris. "Yeah," I answered, already standing. "You got a minute?" he asked. "You tell me." We ran a quick pass on both tapes, he said. Preliminary. Nothing deep yet, just basic enhancement and cleanup. I thought you'd want to hear it straight away. My pulse kicked up. And you should come down here, he replied. I'd rather you hear it in the lab than over your kitchen speakers. I can be there in 20, I said. Good. Ask for me at the front desk. And Daniel? His voice dropped half a notch. Drive careful. The lab was in a separate building from the main station, one of those squat, unremarkable structures that looked like it could just as easily store office supplies as hold on to answers. The air inside was cooler than outside, conditioned and filtered, carrying that faint chemical tang of cleaning agents and old electronics. Harris met me just past the security door, his tie looser than usual, dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. You look worse than I do, I said. That's debatable, he replied. Come on. They're waiting. He led me down a short hallway into a windowless room lined with panels, dials and monitors that glowed with soft greens and blues. 2 people were already there. A woman in her 40s with close-cropped hair and glasses, and a younger guy with headphones around his neck and a coffee mug that said, "Trust me, I'm listening." The woman stood when we walked in. Daniel, this is Claire, Harris said. She's our audio specialist. And that's Leo. He helps make her magic look like science. Nice to meet you, Claire said, and her voice was gentle in a way that told me Harris had warned her who I was. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. Yeah, I said. Me too. She gestured to a chair in front of the main screen. Why don't you sit? I'll walk you through what we've done so far. On the monitor, I could see 2 horizontal waves, jagged lines that moved left to right in different colors. One was labeled Tape 1, the other Tape 2. Even without understanding the details, I could see similarities. Peaks and valleys lining up where the knocks must have been, patterns repeating where silence should have lived. We digitized both tapes and ran some basic filtering, Claire said, her hands moving with easy familiarity over the controls. There's a lot of noise, especially on the first one. Age, storage conditions, standard background hiss. But the interesting thing is that the noise profile on both is almost identical. Meaning? I asked. meaning they were almost certainly recorded on the same device, she said. Same hardware hiss, same mechanical imprint. Whoever made the second tape either used the same recorder you have, or they had it in their possession for a while. I felt a slow chill creep up the back of my neck. The recorder was here, I said. In my attic, in that box. I haven't taken it anywhere. Then either someone had it before you found it, she said, or someone has the same model, with the same wear pattern, which is possible but unlikely. There's more. She tapped a key. The waveform zoomed in around a cluster of spikes. These are the knocks. Both tapes. She hit play on the left channel. Thud. Thud. On the right. Thud. The sound was cleaner here, less buried under the blanket of analog hiss, but still unmistakably the same two dull impacts that had gotten under my skin. We lined them up, Leo said, leaning forward, his fingers poised over the keyboard. Watch this. He overlaid the two signals. On the screen, the peaks of the knocks almost perfectly matched, down to the minuscule variations in volume and timing. They're not just similar, he said. They're functionally identical. So someone copied them, I said. Sampled from one tape to make the other. That was our first thought, Claire said. But there are micro differences in the frequency response that suggest they're not digital clones. More like the same act captured twice under nearly identical conditions, which is weird. People don't knock exactly the same way twice, not with this level of precision. My mind did not want to go where that statement pointed. You're saying what, exactly? I asked slowly. I'm saying whoever made these either has a very sophisticated way of recreating sound from a reference, she said, or they recorded the same physical event twice from almost the same position. And that's not a normal thing to be able to pull off intentionally. Let's get to the part you heard last night, Harris interjected gently. The voice. Claire nodded and brought up another section. Tape 2, the red cassette. I've boosted the frequencies around the whisper and reduced some of the surrounding noise. It's still distorted, but clearer than what you heard at home. She clicked, and the speakers filled with that now familiar rising static, the hum threading under it like a wire drawn tight. The knocks came, precise and heavy, then the soft scrape. And then, closer and clearer than before, the whisper. Can you hear her now? Hearing it in this environment, stripped of the domestic clutter of my kitchen, made it worse. The voice was male low, with a slight rasp at the end of each word. No accent that I could pick out, just a flat, almost emotionless delivery that somehow made it feel more deliberate. I realized my hands were gripping the arms of the chair, hard enough to make my knuckles ache. We ran it through a few comparison databases, Leo said quietly. No matches yet. It doesn't sound like anyone on our radar. We'll keep checking, but you have no idea who it is. I finished for him. Not yet, Claire said. There's something else, though. On tape 1, she switched to the first waveform, zooming into a section right after the second knock. You mentioned hearing. Something, she said. A word. A name. Dad, I said, the word catching a little in my throat even now. I thought maybe I was hearing what I wanted to hear. That's always a risk in these situations, she said gently. So we didn't rely on subjective listening. We did a spectral analysis, tried to see if there was anything embedded in the noise that looked like speech. And there is. She brought up a new display, a vertical graph of colors and lines, alien but strangely beautiful. This, she said, pointing to a faint diagonal streak, is consistent with a very soft, very short vocalization, not noise, not mechanical, human. We isolated it as much as we could. It's rough, but, well, you should hear it. She pressed play. The knocks sounded again, then the hiss rose and through it, clearer than it had any right to be, came a small, high voice. Dad! It was distorted. The syllable was stretched just a little, but the shape of it, the way the D softened, and the vowel climbed at the end, It was her. Not generic, not some off-the-shelf child sample from a movie. My daughter calling to me from inside a broken second of tape. My chest tightened so abruptly it hurt. For a moment, the room seemed to narrow to a tunnel with that sound at the end. I had to blink hard to keep everything from blurring. "Daniel," Harris said quietly. "You okay?" "No," I said, and my voice didn't sound like mine. "Play it again." They did. Twice. 3 times. Each time, the word seemed to etch itself deeper into me, like someone carving letters into bone. On the 4th pass, I raised a hand. "Stop." The room fell silent. Even the fans in the equipment racks seemed quieter. "So it's real," I said. "It's not just me losing it. It's real," Claire confirmed. "There is a child's voice on tape 1, saying a word that strongly resembles Dad. We can't say with 100% certainty that it's your daughter without a voice sample from before, but with your permission, we can try to compare home videos, voicemail messages, anything where she speaks clearly. You can have whatever you need," I said. "I'll bring you a whole hard drive if I have to. We'll take it one step at a time," she said. "There's another layer, too. On both tapes, there's a low-level background pattern that doesn't match typical environmental noise. We think it might be some kind of signal, maybe a location imprint. Electrical hum, specific to a building or device. We're working on that. So what you're telling me," I said slowly, "is that someone used my own recorder, somehow captured my daughter's voice on it, copied or recreated the same knocks onto a second tape, and then dropped that tape on my porch with a message? And they did it recently enough that the neighbor saw someone out there last night." "That's one working theory," Harris said. "Another is that whoever took Molly kept that recorder, used it with her back then, and is now sending you pieces of whatever they recorded. We don't know why. We don't know what they want. But they're escalating." A cold, clear anger settled in where the panic had been. "Then we escalate too," I said. Harris's jaw tightened. "We escalate smart," he said. "We don't give them what they want until we know what that is. They're trying to get inside your head, Daniel. Don't let them steer you. Easy for you to say," I shot back. "It's not your kid whispering from a cassette." He took that hit without flinching. "No," he said, "it's not. Which is exactly why I need you to keep your head. Because if you lose it, they win. And if they win, we may never get her back one way or another." The phrase "one way or another" lodged in my chest like a splinter. I stood up, needing to move, needing to break the gravity of the chair. "What's next?" I asked, forcing my voice to steady. "You analyze the hum. You try to match the voice. You look at the indent on the red tape. Then what?" "Then we start looking for cameras," Harris said. "Cameras?" He nodded. "Whoever dropped that tape on your porch last night had to come from somewhere and go somewhere. Your neighbor saw them. Our unmarked car didn't, which means they were cautious. But people miss things. Cameras don't. There are doorbells on your street, storefronts on the corner, maybe traffic cams on the main road. We widen the circle and start pulling footage." "And if you find them?" I asked. "Then we'll have a face," he said. "And a face is the start of a name." I stared at the waveform still frozen on the screen, the tiny spike that was my daughter's voice immortalized as a little blue fracture. Whoever had done this wasn't just a monster in the abstract anymore. They were a person with hands and lungs and eyes who had stood on my porch and left me a message like a gift. "I want copies of the enhanced audio," I said. "Both tapes. Everything you played me today." Harris frowned. "What for?" "So I can listen," I said. "So I can hear what they wanted me to hear. Maybe there's something you're not catching. Some detail, some pattern. They're talking to me, Harris. Let me talk back, even if it's just inside my own head. That's not how any of this works," he said quietly. "Humor me." He hesitated, then nodded to Claire. She gave him a look but didn't argue. Instead, she began clicking through menus. "I can export low-resolution copies," she said. "Nothing that would interfere with evidentiary integrity. MP3 South with our current filters applied." "That's fine," I said. "I don't care about bit rates. I care about the voice." A few minutes later, she handed me a small flash drive. It felt too light for what it contained. "Don't overdo it," she said, and there was genuine concern in her eyes. "People can fall down a rabbit hole with this kind of thing. Hearing patterns where there are none. Living in headphones. I've seen it." "Too late," I said, and tried to make it sound like a joke. On the drive back home, the city looked different. Every camera I passed, every convex mirror outside a store, every reflective window felt like a set of eyes watching not me, but the invisible thread tied between me and whoever had left that tape. The unmarked car was still at the corner when I pulled up to my house, the officer inside raising a hand in a small, perfunctory wave that said he was both on my side and tired of being here already. Inside, the house greeted me with the same familiar emptiness. I went straight to the living room, plugged the drive into my laptop, and transferred the files. For a long moment, I just stared at the two icons on the screen, tape 1_enhanced and tape 2_enhanced, two digital ghosts waiting to be summoned. "Can you hear her now?" The question from the red tape echoed in my head, but for the first time, it didn't land as a taunt. It sounded like a challenge. I put on my headphones, hit play, and listened. I didn't stop listening until my ears ached and the world outside the headphones felt thin and unreal, like a set built around me. I replayed the enhanced files again and again, not just the obvious parts, the knocks, the whispers, but the empty stretches in between, the places where most people would hear only silence. There's a kind of madness that lives in repetition, in scanning the same seconds for something you might have missed, and I could feel it settling around me like fog, but I kept going anyway. If whoever made these tapes had hidden something for me, it wasn't going to announce itself on the first pass. After a while, the house disappeared. There was no living room, no clock, no traffic outside, just the hiss, the hum, the knocks, the breath. On the first tape, I focused on the moment around Molly's voice, zooming in mentally on the half-second where Dad lived. Sometimes it sounded closer, sometimes further away. Once for a heartbeat, I could have sworn there was another word trying to form after it, something cut off or smothered before it reached the mic. I backed up, played it again. Nothing. Just that single, fragile syllable hanging in the noise like a loose thread. On the second tape, the red one, I kept circling the phrase, "Can you hear her now?" The man's voice was steady, almost casual, like he was asking if the TV volume was okay. But under that calm, there was something else, a tightness at the edges of his words, a faint, almost amused exhale at the end of the sentence. He knew exactly what that line would do to me. This wasn't just cruelty. It was control. I don't know how long I sat there before my body reminded me it existed. My neck hurt. My lower back throbbed. My eyes felt like they'd been rubbed with sand. I pulled the headphones off and let them rest around my neck, the sounds bleeding faintly into the open air. For a moment, I just listened to the house breathe, the tick of the clock, the distant hum of the fridge, the soft, random creaks of settling wood. Ordinary noises, suddenly suspicious. Once you start hearing ghosts in static, it's hard not to hear them everywhere. I was about to close the laptop and force myself to walk away when a different thought slid in, quiet but insistent. The hum. Claire had mentioned it an undercurrent on both tapes that didn't match normal background noise. Some kind of environmental signature, maybe. A power source. A room. A machine. Something that had been there both times the recorder ran. If there was a clue hidden anywhere, it might not be in the words at all. It might be in the spaces between them. I dragged the timeline on the audio player, skipping past the obvious spikes to the flatter, boring stretches most people would ignore. Then I did something I hadn't done yet. I turned the volume down instead of up. At maximum gain, everything turned into a wall of hiss. But lower, just above the edge of audibility, the hum separated itself out, a low, steady presence, like distant machinery heard through a wall. It wasn't a simple tone. It pulsed, almost imperceptibly, rising and falling over a long, slow cycle. Not perfectly regular, either. There were tiny stutters, brief flickers where it dipped or wavered, as if whatever made it wasn't entirely healthy. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what kind of place sounded like that. A basement with an old freezer running, a boiler room, a narrow hallway outside a constantly humming transformer, somewhere enclosed, somewhere forgotten. My phone buzzed next to the keyboard, yanking me back. I glanced at the screen, half expecting Harris again, but the caller ID just said unknown. Under normal circumstances, I might have let it go to voicemail. Now, every unknown felt like it might be a hand reaching in from the other side of the story. Yeah, I answered. For a moment, there was nothing, just lying noise and the faint impression of an open, empty space at the other end. Then a voice came through, brittle and too loud, like the caller was holding the phone too close. Mr. Carter? It was a woman, older, maybe, or just worn down. There was a tremor under her words, the kind that comes from too much caffeine, too little sleep, or living too long with something you can't explain. Who is this? I asked. My name's Karen, she said. Karen Willis. You don't know me, but I saw you. On the news? When Molly first went missing? My grip on the phone tightened. Old interviews, old pleas, old footage of my family's worst days, kept on a loop for strangers. How did you get this number, Karen? She hesitated. I could hear papers rustling, the creak of a chair. Look, I know you must get a lot of calls. People saying they've seen her, or they know something. I'm not one of those. I mean, I did call the tip line back then, but nobody ever called me back. I figured, maybe they thought I was crazy. That doesn't answer my question. She took a shuddering breath. I have a son who works with audio stuff, studios, podcasts, whatever kids do now. He knows a guy at the station. When I heard about the tapes this morning, her voice cracked. I begged him to get me your number. I told him I had to talk to you before I lost my nerve. My heart rate kicked up a notch. The story was messy, but not impossible. And if Harris had already let something slip about the tapes to the press, it wouldn't take long for details to start leaking. What do you want to talk about? I asked, keeping my tone flat. Can you tell me something first? She asked. Is it true? About the knocking? About the voice? I closed my eyes. The laptop screen glowed in my peripheral vision, the waveform of the hum frozen mid-pulse. What exactly did you hear? They said there were tapes, she said, that there were sounds on them that shouldn't be there. Maybe a child, maybe your daughter, and there was something else too. A man asking if you can hear her. Is that? Her words stumbled to a stop. Is that real? There was no point in lying. Not to someone who'd gone to this much trouble, just to ask the question out loud. Yeah, I said quietly. It's real. She made a small sound, halfway between a sob and a laugh. Then I'm not crazy. Karen, I said, why would you think you're crazy? Because I've heard it too, she whispered. Not on a tape. In my house. The room seemed to tilt a fraction to the left. You need to explain that. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I know how that sounds. I know you must get people like me all the time. I almost didn't call, but when they started talking about the knocks, she drew in a shaky breath. My daughter, she was 10 when she disappeared. Her name was Lily. This was, God, 12 years ago now. Same town, different side of the river. They never found her either. The air felt thinner. I remember that case, I said slowly. The flyers. The search in the park. Yeah, she said, the words soaked in old grief. That was us. After she was gone, I started hearing things. At first, I thought it was just the house. You know how it is, when everything's too quiet, but then it kept happening. Little knocks on the wall in the middle of the night. Twice. Always twice. Sometimes on my bedroom door, sometimes on the floor beneath the bed. Just two, with that little pause between. My skin prickled. Did you tell the police? Of course I did, she said. They were kind about it. Said grief does strange things, that houses settle, that pipes knock. I tried to believe them. Really, I did. But then, months later, I woke up one night and heard someone standing just outside my bedroom door. I couldn't hear footsteps, not really. Just breathing. Like they were trying not to be heard and failing. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until my lungs forced in a ragged inhale. The house around me seemed to lean closer, listening. And then? I asked. And then he spoke, she said. A man, voice like gravel. He said, "Can you hear her now?" Right through the door. Like he was asking me to turn up the volume on a TV. And then he knocked. Twice. Same way. Lily used to knock when she wanted to come into our room at night. The world contracted to the sound of her words. Same phrase. Same pattern. Sane intimate cruelty, deployed years before anyone had ever heard of my daughter. How many times did this happen? I asked. 3, she said. The first time, I thought I'd dreamed it. The second time, I called the police. They checked the house, the yard, the street. Nobody. No signs of forced entry. Doors still locked from the inside. The third time, I didn't call anyone. I just sat there and listened until he went away. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I thought it was the devil, if you want to know the truth. My pastor told me it was my mind playing tricks. My doctor said it was trauma and gave me pills. Eventually, it stopped, or I stopped hearing it. But when they said that phrase on the radio today, she trailed off, then forced herself on. It's him. It's the same man. I know it. A slow, cold fury uncoiled itself in my gut. Whoever was behind this hadn't just chosen me. They had a history, a pattern, other families, other missing girls. Karen, I said carefully, where do you live now? Same house, she said. I could never make myself move. I kept thinking, if she came back, she'd come there first. Of course she would. Of course Karen had stayed. People who tell you to get a fresh start after your child disappears have never lived with a bedroom full of toys that might be needed again one day. I need you to do something for me, I said. I need you to call the detective in charge of my case. His name is Harris. Tell him exactly what you just told me. Every detail. And tell him I asked you to. I don't want them to think I'm crazy again, she said, a fragile edge of panic in her words. They won't, I said. Not this time. Not after the tapes. Please. If this is connected, and it sure as hell sounds like it is, then you're not just helping me. You're helping Lily. That bought a few seconds of silence. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll call. Will they talk to me this time? They will, I said. If they don't, I'll make sure they do. We said goodbye, and I ended the call with fingers that didn't feel entirely under my control. The room seemed off-kilter now, like the angles of it had shifted by a degree or two. 12 years, same town. Another little girl gone into that blank space in the map. Another parent haunted in the dark by a man who liked to stand on the other side of thin barriers and ask cruel questions. I didn't bother waiting for Harris to reach out. I called him myself. "Tell me you're at your desk," I said as soon as he picked up. "Nice to hear from you too," he replied. "What's wrong? Do you remember the Lily Willis case?" I asked. 10-year-old, disappeared 12 years ago. Park search. Never found. There was a brief pause. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I was still a rookie then, but yeah, why?" "Her mother just called me," I said. "She's been hearing the same phrase, the same knocks, for years." I walked him through the conversation as precisely as I could remember it, forcing myself to stick to the facts and not the way my hands had started shaking halfway through. By the time I finished, Harris's breathing on the other end of the line had gone shallow and clipped. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "Son of an absolute bitch. So this isn't just my personal haunting," I said. "We've got a pattern." "Maybe," he said. "Or we've got someone who keeps tabs on old cases and likes reruns. Either way, it just turned into something bigger than one missing girl and some creepy tapes." "You believe her?" I asked. "I believe she believes it," he said. "And with what we've got now, that's enough for me to take it seriously. I'll pull the old file, see who worked the case, what they checked, what they didn't, and I'll talk to her myself. Today." "She said he came to her house," I said. "No forced entry. No footprints. Just a voice through the door and knocks on the wall. Sound familiar? Too familiar?" he said grimly. "Look, I need you to sit tight for a few hours. Don't go anywhere without telling me. I want to see if there's any overlap between your life and hers that we missed. Places you both went. People you both knew. Patterns in how whoever this is chooses his families." "You think this guy picks us?" I asked. "Like from a list?" "I think people like this don't do anything by accident," he said. "He likes intimacy. He likes getting close without being seen. He likes walking right up to the edge of your world and tapping on it. He didn't just happen to choose you and Karen in the same town by chance. There's a reason. We just have to find it before he decides to make his next move." The idea that I might be part of a selection process made my skin crawl. I paced to the window, looking out at the street, at the unmarked car, at the normal life rolling past my abnormal one. Somewhere out there, a man who had spoken inside my head through cheap plastic and magnetic tape was probably going about his day, buying coffee, filling up his gas tank, breathing the same air as everyone else. What if his next move is another tape? I asked. "Then this time, we'll be ready," Harris said. "We'll widen surveillance, get a car closer, see if we can catch him in the act. Until then, I need you to do something that's going to sound impossible." "Let me guess," I said. "Don't obsess over the recordings." "Too late for that, I know," he said. "But try not to hear things that aren't there. Let the lab do its work. If you notice anything concrete, patterns, background sounds, anything specific, you call me. Otherwise, don't go diving so deep you can't find your way back." He hung up before I could answer, probably knowing what my answer would be anyway. The rest of the day blurred into a strange half-state, part of me moving through the motions of existence, showering, changing clothes, forcing down food I couldn't taste, while another part hovered in that narrow slice of time on the tapes. I tried to stay away from the laptop, but it sat there like an open wound. Eventually, inevitably, I gave in. This time, I didn't start with the knocks or the voices. I started with the spaces, with the hum. I looped a 30-second fragment where nothing important happened and just listened, over and over, the way you might listen to someone breathing in the dark to make sure they were still alive. After a while, patterns started to emerge, not just in the rises and falls, but in the rhythm of small interruptions, barely there stutters. They reminded me of something I couldn't quite place, a machine cycling, a refrigerator compressor, an air conditioning unit turning on and off on a hot day, a fan in an old server room. On the second tape, the hum was there too, but different. Same general tone, same signature, but the interruptions didn't line up. The stutters came at different intervals, like an echo of the first, recorded at a different time in the same place. Same room, same device complaining in the walls. Different day. Whoever had made these tapes hadn't just gone for effect. They'd gone to a specific location twice, possibly years apart, and recorded pieces of some ongoing, ugly story for an audience of exactly one, me. At some point, exhaustion finally ambushed me. I woke up hours later on the couch, the laptop screen dark, the headphones dug uncomfortably into the side of my head. For a disoriented second, I thought I was still in the lab, or in some stranger's basement, until the familiar shape of my living room settled around me. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. And then, from somewhere deep inside it, something knocked. Twice. The sound was soft, almost polite, like whatever made it didn't want to startle me too much. 2 dull taps, spaced just far enough apart to be deliberate. If it had been any other pattern 3 quick raps, a random shuffle of impact, I might have written it off as the house shifting or a neighbor slamming a car door. But this wasn't random. This was a rhythm I knew too well, burned into me now by years of memory and 2 cursed tapes. Thud, thud. My body reacted before my mind caught up. I sat bolt upright, the headphones sliding off my shoulder and dropping to the floor. For a moment, I didn't move. I just listened, every nerve straining toward the stillness that followed, waiting for a third knock, a voice, a footstep, anything to turn this into something explainable. Nothing came. The house went back to its careful, practiced silence. "Hello?" I called out, hating how cliché it sounded, and hating even more how small my voice felt in my own home. No answer. I pushed myself up from the couch slowly, every part of me buzzing with the wrong kind of adrenaline. My first instinct was to grab something heavy, a lamp, a fireplace poker. Anything but the surreal part of all this was the feeling that a weapon wouldn't help against what I was dealing with. You can't hit a sound. You can't swing at a pattern. The knocks had been muffled, not close like they'd come from right outside the living room, and not so distant that they could have been from the street. Somewhere inside the house, a few rooms away, behind a wall or under a floor. The kind of sound you hear at night and convince yourself you imagined, because the alternative is too unnerving. I forced myself to move 1 room at a time. The kitchen was empty, chairs where I'd left them, mugs still on the counter, the faint imprint of condensation on the table where my elbow had rested earlier. I stood there for a full minute, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator and the clock on the wall marking seconds, trying to pick out any other rhythm hidden underneath. Nothing. From there, I moved to the hallway, the air cooler as I left the main rooms of the house. I checked the front door still locked, deadbolt engaged, chain in place, porch light off. Through the beveled glass, I could see a slice of my street, quiet and ordinary. The unmarked car still at the corner like a small, patient animal, waiting for a signal it would recognize. No one on the porch, no shapes in the yard. "Okay," I muttered under my breath. "So where the hell did you come from?" The knocks had carried a slight resonance, the kind you get from something hitting hollow space. Not drywall. Not a solid table. Something with air behind it. A closet door. A cupboard. A floorboard over a crawl space. I turned toward the staircase and hesitated. Upstairs was Molly's room, the guest room, the bathroom, the narrow closet that still held winter coats we hardly used. The sound hadn't felt like it came from above me when I'd first heard it. But then again, I'd been half asleep, disoriented. My brain could have misfiled the direction. It happens. That's what I told myself anyway, as I started up the stairs, each step creaking just enough to announce my progress. At the top, the hallway yawned left and right. pale light from the small window at the far end, turning everything a washed-out gray. Molly's door was closed. I hadn't fully shut it in months, always leaving it open a crack like I used to when she was afraid of the dark. Apparently, at some point during my slow slide into obsessing over tapes, I'd closed it without realizing. My hand hovered over the doorknob, fingers just brushing the cool metal. For a few seconds, I stood there, frozen by a completely irrational thought. That if I opened the door fast enough, I might actually catch her there, standing in the middle of the room with that guilty look kids get when they know they're not where they're supposed to be. The image was so vivid it hurt. I turned the knob and pushed. The familiar smell hit me, first stale fabric, faint dust, a trace of the strawberry shampoo she used to like baked deep into old pillows and stuffed animals. The room looked exactly like it had the last time I was in it. Bed made by Amy, not by Molly. Posters peeling slightly at the corners. Desk littered with the fossilized remains of a fourth grader's life-colored pencils, sticker sheets, a half-finished drawing of a horse that would never be completed. No one was there. Of course, no one was there. I stepped inside anyway, more out of habit than expectation, and let my eyes track around the room, looking for anything out of place. A drawer left open. A toy moved. A mark on the carpet where someone might have stood for too long. Nothing. The only sound was the faint whoosh of air through the vent near the ceiling. Did you used to knock like that up here? I asked the empty room quietly, surprising myself. When you wanted to come in? My mind supplied the answer without hesitation. Yes. She had 2 knocks, that small pause. Dad, can I? From the other side of the door when she couldn't sleep, or when she had a nightmare and wanted to climb into our bed. It was the same rhythm she'd carried into every part of the house, like a tiny, personal signature. The longer I stood there, the more wrong it felt to stay, so I backed out and closed the door gently, leaving it just slightly ajar this time. The knock hadn't come from there. I felt that as strongly as I felt the emptiness inside. Back downstairs, I paused at the bottom of the steps and listened again. This time, it was different. Sometimes you can tell where a sound came from not by hearing it, but by feeling how the house absorbed it. The memory that rose up unbidden was of the floor under the living room couch, the faintest tremor when the knocks landed. Under, not above. The basement. I really didn't want it to be the basement. The door was in the hallway between the kitchen and the back door, half hidden behind a hanging coat. I pulled the coat aside, revealing the plain white paint and cheap brass knob, and stood there for a few seconds, staring at it. There were no sounds coming from beyond it now. No scraping, no shuffling, no whispered questions. Just the dense quiet that basements have, the kind that always feels a few degrees colder than the rest of the house. Of course, I muttered. Of course you'd pick down there. I flipped on the light before I opened the door, needing that thin assurance of control. The single bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered on, casting its sickly yellow over the rough concrete floor and stacked boxes just visible from the top. I gripped the handrail and started down slowly, acutely aware of every creak of the wooden steps under my weight. The basement smelled like old paper, damp concrete, and the faint tongue of metal. The water heater hummed in the corner, a soft, steady sound that, just for a second, reminded me of the low hum on the tapes. Not the same, not exactly, but close enough to make my skin crawl. Hello? I said again, my voice sounding small against the unfinished walls. If this is your idea of a joke, it's not funny. Nothing answered but the buzzing of the light. I walked the perimeter of the room, eyes scanning for anything that didn't belong. The boxes along the walls were the same ones that had been there for years. Christmas decorations, old tax records, baby clothes Amy had insisted we save, just in case. The workbench in the far corner held the usual chaos of tools, half-finished projects, and the dead radio I'd always meant to fix. No footprints in the dust, No shifted objects. No red cassette players left like offerings on the floor. I was about to let out a breath. I hadn't realized I'd been holding when my foot hit something that wasn't supposed to be there. It slid a few inches with a tiny scrape. I looked down. A small, gray stone sat near the base of the wall, just where the last step met the floor. It was out of place, too smooth and oval, the kind you'd find in a riverbed, not in a Midwestern basement. Attached to it, looped tightly around the middle, was a thin strip of electrical tape. Stuck to the tape was a folded scrap of white paper, no bigger than a matchbook. Every instinct I had screamed at me not to touch it. Every other instinct screamed louder. I crouched down slowly, heart thudding in my ears, and picked the stone up. It was cool and heavier than it looked. The paper crinkled under my fingers. Whoever had placed it there wanted it found, but not easily hidden in plain sight in the one part of the house I avoided as often as possible. With fingers that weren't as steady as I wanted them to be, I peeled the tape back and freed the paper. It unfolded into a small square, creased cleanly, like someone had taken their time with it. There were only 4 words written on it, in neat, blocky letters. She can hear you. For a long, suspended moment, the world narrowed to that scrap of paper and the weight of the stone still sitting in my other hand. The sentence crawled under my skin, turning itself over and over like a splinter you can't quite work free. It was the mirror image of the question on the tape. Not, can you hear her now? But she can hear you. An answer to a question I hadn't really asked out loud. Somewhere above me, in the quiet house, a floorboard creaked on its own. The kind of sound you tell yourself is nothing. The kind of sound you stop dismissing once a stranger starts leaving messages in your basement. I swallowed hard, forcing my throat to work. If you're down here with me, I said, the words sticking to the air, this is your one chance to walk out the front door instead of being stuffed into the back of a patrol car, because I swear to God, they're not far. And they're not stupid. Silence. The water heater hummed. The light buzzed. My voice went nowhere and came back with nothing. I slipped the note into my pocket, next to the phantom weight where the first cassette had sat the night before, and took out my phone with my free hand. My thumb hovered over Harris's name for a second, not because I was hesitating about calling him, but because I was imagining how this was going to sound out loud. Hey, detective. Good news. The house really is haunted. Also, someone's been in my basement. I hit call anyway. He answered on the second ring. Tell me you're not about to say what I think you're about to say, he said, skipping hello altogether. Depends on what you think I'm about to say, I replied. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Did something happen? He asked. Because Karen just left my office an hour ago, and my day doesn't need any help getting worse. There were knocks, I said. 2 of them. Inside the house. He didn't swear, but I could hear the effort it took not to. When? Not long ago, I said. Woke me up on the couch. Sounded like they came from below, not above. I checked the house. Doors are still locked. Windows, too. But there was something in the basement. Define something. I took a breath. A stone, I said, with a note taped to it. 4 words. She can hear you. This time he did swear, softly and with feeling. Don't touch anything else, he said. Don't leave the basement. I'm calling the car on your street, and I'm on my way. 5 minutes. Basement's clear, I said, glancing around again, just to be sure. Whoever put it here is long gone. Then you'll have no trouble staying put, he shot back. Daniel, I'm serious. If this guy is coming and going from your house without breaking a sweat, we have a problem. I need that scene untouched. The word scene made my stomach turn. It made everything feel official, stamped, logged. Not just my creepy basement anymore, but part of a larger map on a wall somewhere. Fine, I said. I'll be here. With the water heater. He hung up, And I was alone again with the hum and the buzzing light and the growing realization that whoever I was dealing with didn't just want to be heard. He wanted to be felt. He wanted me to know he could get as close as he wanted, whenever he wanted, and still leave without a trace, except for the breadcrumbs he chose. She can hear you. The words wouldn't leave my head. If it was a taunt, it was a new variation, no longer questioning my ability to hear Molly, but asserting hers. As if my daughter were somewhere, somehow, listening to this whole nightmare unfold. As if what I said, what I did, how I responded, might reach her the way her faint dad had reached me on that broken second of tape. For the first time since this began, the fear didn't just run one way. It wasn't just about what this man could do to me. It was about what he might be doing to her. Upstairs, a car door slammed. Another a moment later. Muffled voices. Footsteps over my head. Harris didn't bother calling my name. A second later, his shoes appeared at the top of the basement stairs, followed by his tense silhouette, framed in the doorway like a cutout. "You pick up a hobby down here without telling me?" he asked, his attempt at levity landing somewhere short of its target. "Yeah," I said. "Stone collecting." I held up the rock. He saw the tape, the absence of the note, and his eyes sharpened. "Please tell me you didn't open that without gloves," he said. "Would you have left it there if it were your kid?" I asked. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Instead, he pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, walked carefully down the stairs, and took the stone from me like it might explode. "Where exactly was it?" he asked. I pointed to the spot near the bottom step. "Right there," like he wanted me to find it on the way down. "Or on the way up." Harris nodded to the crime tech who'd followed him in, a woman with a camera already in her hands. "Photograph the area," he said. "Dust for prints on the wall, the step, the handrail, everything. If he so much as breathed too hard down here, I want to know." The tech moved with efficient precision, marking, snapping pictures, brushing surfaces. It felt strange watching someone treat my basement like evidence, each square foot of concrete suddenly more important than the rest of the house. "Where's the note?" Harris asked without looking at me. I pulled it from my pocket and handed it over. He took it between two gloved fingers, unfolded it, and read. His jaw clenched around the second word. "Same handwriting as the address on the envelope that came with the first tape," he said after a moment. "Block letters. Careful, like he doesn't want his natural style slipping through. So it's definitely the same guy," I said. "Oh yeah," he said. "We're way past coincidence." The tech glanced up from her work. "No obvious prints so far," she said. "But I'll run it all anyway. Run the stone, the tape, the note, the spot where it sat," Harris said. "If we get even a partial, I'm buying you dinner." "You say that every time," she replied, but there was no real humor in it. I watched them move through the basement, turning my private dread into something measurable and methodical, and a strange calm settled over me. This was different from listening to ghosts and static, or arguing with my own mind at 3 a.m. This was work. Process. People whose job it was to make sense of impossible things. Still, as Harris handed the note off to be bagged, I couldn't shake the feeling that, somewhere very far away, or very close by, someone was watching all of this unfold just as intently as I was listening to his tapes. "She can hear you." If that was true, if there was even a sliver of possibility buried in it, then so could he. Fine, I thought, as the flash from the crime tech's camera strobed against the concrete walls. Let him listen. Harris stayed longer this time. Longer than he technically needed to. Longer than most detectives would have. Once their team had bagged the evidence and photographed my basement into submission, the crime techs moved through the house in careful circuits, dusting doorknobs, checking window latches, snapping pictures of hallways and thresholds, as if the act of documenting could retroactively change what had happened here. Through it all, Harris kept circling back to the same spot, standing at the bottom of the basement stairs, staring at the small patch of floor where the stone had been, like he was trying to will a footprint into existence. Front and back doors were locked when you woke up? He asked for the third time as we finally came back up into the kitchen. Yeah, I said. Deadbolts engaged. Chain on the front. You can check the footage from your cruiser. I never left. We're already pulling it, he said. And the body cams from the uniforms who responded. If anyone touched those locks besides you, I want to see it. Or not see it, I said. He shot me a look. Yeah, or that. I poured us both coffee more out of habit than hospitality. He accepted his, but only held it, letting the steam curl up past his face. The kitchen looked smaller with two of us in it, smaller still with the knowledge that someone else had been in this house without either of us knowing until they wanted us to. Let's say the locks were never opened, I said. Let's say he didn't pick anything, didn't jimmy a window, didn't crawl through a vent. What does that leave? Harris rubbed at his eyes, then set the coffee down untouched. It leaves the possibility that he's been in here before, he said. When you weren't home, made himself a copy of a key, learned the layout. Came and went enough times that he doesn't make mistakes anymore. The idea of some stranger moving through my house while I was at work or out buying groceries, brushing past Molly's door, standing where I was standing now, it made my stomach twist. Or, he added reluctantly, it leaves the possibility that he never left. I stared at him. What's that supposed to mean? It means, he said carefully, that once you start talking about basements and crawl spaces and unexplained access, you have to at least consider that he might have a way into this structure that doesn't involve your locks at all. Adjacent properties, shared walls, old contractor shortcuts. Hell, we once had a guy in another jurisdiction who was living in the ceiling of an office supply store for 6 months before anyone figured it out. I looked around my modest, boring house like I was seeing it for the first time. You're telling me there could be some kind of hidden entrance? A tunnel? A hatch? Something? I'm telling you we're going to have someone look, he said. Not you. You? It's a building inspector, maybe. Someone who can read the bones of this place better than we can. And until then? I asked. Until then, you don't sleep down there, he said. You don't wander around at night without your phone on you. And you call me if anything, and I mean anything weird happens. No matter how small. I almost laughed. Define weird, I said. Because my baseline has shifted a bit. He didn't crack a smile. Anything that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, he said. You trust that more than whatever story your brain tries to give you after. The techs finished up a few minutes later, lugging their cases back out to the waiting cars, leaving the house feeling oddly empty again. When the last one was gone, it was just me and Harris in the kitchen, 2 cups of cooling coffee between us, the weight of too many unanswered questions hanging in the air. Karen talked, he said suddenly. Already? He nodded. Came in as soon as she got off the phone with you. Brought photos of Lily, old recordings from her answering machine, even a box of school projects, like we could somehow find clues in her handwriting. She's been waiting 12 years for somebody to take her seriously again. Now she's all in. Did you tell her about the tapes? I asked. Bits and pieces, he said. Enough to reassure her she's not alone. Not enough to give her nightmares worse than the ones she already has. We'll run her house through the same checks. See if there's any sign someone's been playing handyman in her walls, too. I hesitated, then asked the question I didn't really want answered. Do you think he hurt Lily? Harris's gaze met mine, steady and unflinching. I think whoever did this doesn't start with tapes and basement notes, he said. They start with the part that never makes the news the watching. The learning. The catalogs in their head. People like this don't just wake up one day and decide to play ghost. They graduate from something. If Lily was his first attempt, or one of them, Then yeah, it's possible. Maybe even likely. It wasn't the comfort I'd hoped for, but at least it was honest. Silence settled between us again. I broke it. What if he wants us comparing notes? I asked. What if the whole point of this is to get us chasing our tails through old cases while he's setting up something new? Then we multitask, Harris said. We look backward and forward at the same time. We don't let him define the pace of this thing. He's been ahead of everyone for a long time. That doesn't mean he gets to keep that advantage forever. He checked his watch, grimaced. I have to get back to the station, he said. There's paperwork on this you wouldn't believe. Plus, a lieutenant who wants to know why I'm suddenly reopening a cold case that's older than some of the officers under him. What do? I asked. It came out more desperate than I liked. You do what you've been doing, he said. You stay alive. You stay reachable. You listen if you have to, but remember that not everything you hear on those tapes is meant for your ears alone. Some of it might be bait. Some of it might be breadcrumbs. If you can't tell which is which, you call me before you follow anything. He headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. Daniel, he said without turning around, for what it's worth, you're handling this better than most would. That's a low bar, I said. Still, he replied, and then he was gone, leaving me alone with my house and the echo of 2 knocks that seemed to have imprinted themselves into every surface. The rest of the afternoon passed in a fog of practicalities and avoidance. I checked the locks again. I walked the perimeter of the house, looking for cracks, vents, any odd space large enough to hide a person or a plan. I found nothing more sinister than a loose board on the back porch and a squirrel hole under the fence. I tried to eat. I managed half a sandwich before giving up. By early evening, the sky had bruised into a heavy gray, promising rain. The patrol car at the end of the street had been swapped out at some point. A fresh, unfamiliar silhouette now sat where the last had been. I wondered if they briefed the officers on what they were really watching for, or if it was just another assignment on a clipboard. Keep an eye on the weird house with the missing kid and the anxious father. Back inside, I hovered in the doorway of the living room for a while, staring at the laptop on the coffee table like it might spring up and bite me. I knew I shouldn't open those files again. I also knew I was going to. I sat down, woke the computer, and stared at the 2 audio icons a long moment before clicking the one labeled Tape 2_enhanced. If the basement knock and the stone had been meant as an escalation, then this tape was the blueprint. The red cassette, the question, the voice. Can you hear her now? Okay, I murmured under my breath, more to myself than to anyone who might be listening. Let's see what else you slipped in there. This time, I didn't let the words distract me. I scrubbed ahead to just after the whisper, to the seconds of supposed dead space that followed before the static cut off entirely. In the lab, Claire had dismissed those moments as mostly nothing magnetic residue, mechanical noise. But a man who would go to the trouble of reproducing knocks and whispering custom messages onto tape wasn't the type to waste space. I turned the volume down low again, put on the headphones, and let the seconds unravel. For a while, all I heard was hiss and that strange, stretched silence that comes with old recordings. Then, very faintly, something else rose up beneath it, not a hum this time, but a pattern of small, irregular taps. Faster than the knocks, lighter, as if someone was brushing or drumming their fingers against something just out of microphone range. It would have been easy to write it off as handling noise. Except it didn't sound random. It had cadence. Short, short, long. Short, short, long. Pause. Repeat. Morse code floated into my mind uninvited, dredged up from some long-ago movie or half-remembered lesson. Dots and dashes. Short and long. Messages smuggled through walls and pipes when voices were too dangerous. Come on, I muttered, leaning closer, as if proximity could sharpen sound. What are you trying to say? I rewound the same 10 seconds 5 times, counting the taps under my breath. Short, short, long. Short, short, long. The gaps between them were almost equal. It felt intentional. Primitive and desperate, but intentional. I grabbed a notebook from the side table, along with a pen that had to be coaxed back to life, and started marking them down. 3 quick dots, 1 dash. 3 quick dots, 1 dash. Even if it wasn't Morse, even if it was nothing more than my brain pattern, matching under pressure, writing it down made it feel less like drowning. I played the sequence again and again until I could anticipate each tiny impact. It didn't line up with the man's voice. It came afterward, like an echo trying to catch up with the main performance. If the whisper was the headline, this was the fine print. The thought came slowly, and all at once. What if it wasn't him tapping? What if it was her? The possibility hit with a force I hadn't expected. On the first tape, her voice had ridden the noise like a hitchhiker barely there, half swallowed. On the second, the man had center stage. But what if she was still trying, somewhere underneath his performance, to send something through? Not words this time, not a straightforward dad, but the only language she had access to in that moment's sound translated into rhythm. I knew I was on the edge of the rabbit hole Claire had warned me about. I also knew I was going down it anyway. I took out my phone and, before I could overthink it, snapped a photo of the notebook page with my dots and dashes. Then I pulled up a browser and typed Morse code alphabet into the search bar. A simple chart there is dot dash, B's dash, dot, and so on. Lines and lines of letters reduced to simple binary. Short, short, long. 3 dots, 1 dash. It didn't match any single letter cleanly, but maybe I was grouping it wrong. Maybe it wasn't short, short, long as one character, but short, short, and then long with a slightly longer gap before the next set. Without a proper reference, it was guesswork. Dangerous guesswork. Still, one combination jumped out at me as I compared my marks to the chart. Dot dot was I, dash was T-I-T, a word, a fragment, a coincidence maybe, or the start of something larger. It, I said aloud, testing how it sounded. It what? I was right on the edge of calling Claire to ask if her software could break the taps down with more precision when my phone buzzed again, jerking my attention back to the present. This time it was a text, not a call. From an unknown number again, but with a local area code. For a split second, my chest tightened. I half expected some grainy photo attachment, some pixelated nightmare sent by the same person who preferred cassettes. Instead, there were just a few words on the screen. Check your backyard. No signature. No emoji. No context. I was on my feet before the conscious thought had fully formed, phone still in my hand. The living room felt smaller with that message in it, the air heavier. Of course, I said under my breath. Of course you'd pick now. The rational response would have been to call Harris immediately, to stay inside, to let the patrol car at the corner do its job. The problem with rational responses is that they don't always survive contact with adrenaline. I crossed the house in a few long strides, heading for the back door. The blinds over the small window rattled as I yanked them up, letting the gray evening light spill in across the tile. The yard beyond looked like it always did patchy grass. A weather-stained fence, the rusting remnants of Molly's old swing set leaning a little to one side. No movement, no figures. No obvious horror waiting stage center. I unlatched the lock and opened the door anyway. The air outside was colder than it looked, carrying the damp metallic promise of impending rain. Somewhere down the street, a car engine turned over. A dog barked twice and then went quiet. The kind of ordinary soundtrack that makes extraordinary things feel unreal. Okay, I called out, stepping onto the back stoop. You've got my attention. Congratulations. No one answered. If the patrol officer at the corner had noticed me step out, They gave no sign. The angle of the house blocked their direct line of sight to the yard, which, I realized too late, might have been the point. The grass felt uneven under my shoes as I moved slowly toward the middle of the yard, every sense stretched tight. I scanned the fence line, half expecting to see a face peering through a knothole, or the shifting of a shadow where no shadow should be. Nothing. Just wind, the first fat drops of rain, and the creak of the old swing as it swayed lazily in the breeze. At first, I didn't see it. It wasn't until I turned to head back inside, irritation and unease warring in my chest, that the wrongness finally registered. A patch of ground, a few feet from the base of the swing set, looked disturbed. The grass there was darker, the soil underneath turned and slightly raised, like someone had dug and refilled it in a hurry. My legs carried me toward it before my brain could catch up with all the reasons I shouldn't go near it without law enforcement, and a dozen witnesses. Up close, there was no mistaking it. The soil was still damp, richer than the packed dirt around it, and the scuffed arcs in the grass nearby marked where a shovel or a boot had scrawled its presence. Whoever had done this hadn't bothered to smooth their work perfectly. They'd relied on my inattention. On routine? Kneeling down, I reached out and pressed my fingers lightly against the ground. It gave a little soft where the rest of the yard was hard, fresh, recent. Don't, I whispered to myself. Don't touch it. Don't dig. Call Harris. I stood up, took a step back, pulled out my phone. A new text arrived before I could hit his name. Dig.